The moment I opened the front door that Thursday evening, I knew something was wrong. The air inside my parents' house felt heavier than usual, and the sound of Sophie's quiet sobbing drifted from somewhere near the garage. My heart lurched. Sophie, my 14-year-old daughter, was supposed to be in her bedroom doing homework. Instead, I found her sitting on a cardboard box in the dim light of the garage, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her long brown hair was falling in messy strands across her tear-streaked face. Around her clothes were crammed into garbage bags and stacked haphazardly, her lamp teetering on a pile of shoes. I stared at the scene, confused and angry. Sophie lifted her head and whispered, "They told me to move out." For Noah. Noah was my 2-year-old nephew, the son of my younger brother Mark and his wife Hannah. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. Sophie's bedroom was small, but it was hers. She had decorated the walls with her paintings, each one bursting with color and life. And now they were rolled up, stuffed into a box, as if they were disposable. I marched into the house, Sophie trailing behind me, and found my parents in the living room. My father didn't even look up from the TV when he said Noah needs more space. Sophie's old enough to sleep on the sofa. My mother added without meeting my eyes, "It's only fair. He's a baby, she'll understand." I felt my jaw tighten. Fair. They were asking my daughter to give up her room in the middle of the school year to sleep in a space where she couldn't study or have privacy just so their golden grandchild could have a playroom. They didn't know that for months I'd been quietly working on something, saving every extra dollar selling Sophie's art online, preparing for a day I hoped wouldn't have to come so soon. But standing there with Sophie trembling beside me and my parents staring at me like I was overreacting, I realized the day had arrived. They thought they were teaching us our place. They had no idea we were about to leave it behind for good. When Sophie was born, I was only 21, fresh out of community college with a certificate in graphic design and more determination than stability. Her father Daniel and I had been high school sweethearts, but we were never equipped for the realities of adult life. By the time Sophie turned 5, our relationship had collapsed under the weight of bills, resentment, and Daniel's disappearing acts. He moved 2 states away and remarried, leaving me to raise our daughter with minimal child support that often arrived late, if at all. My parents, Evelyn and George, offered me a place to stay until I got back on my feet. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, but temporary had a way of stretching when rent prices skyrocketed and my freelance work paid in unpredictable waves. My relationship with my parents was complicated even before Sophie was born. Growing up, I was the dependable one. The one who cleaned up after family dinners, the one who looked after Mark, who was 3 years younger and always found trouble. My parents called him spirited charming, a free spirit. To me, he was reckless, entitled, and coddled. They paid for his college tuition twice after he flunked out the first time, bought him his first car outright, and later loaned him thousands to start a business that fizzled in less than a year. Meanwhile, I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for my own schooling and drove a rusted Honda Civic that broke down twice a month. When Mark married Hannah and they had Noah, it was as if the sun itself had come to live in my parents' orbit. Every conversation revolved around him. Every family gathering was scheduled around his nap times and picky eating habits. Sophie noticed it too. At Christmas, Noah received a miniature electric car, the kind you can actually drive around the yard. Sophie got a sweater and a $20 gift card. She didn't complain, but I could see the flicker of hurt in her eyes. I told myself it was just the novelty of having a baby in the family, that my parents still loved Sophie, that I could shield her from the favoritism. But little moments kept piling up. When I landed a steady part-time position at a local marketing firm and started bringing in more income, I thought we might finally move into our own small apartment. Then my hours were cut and I was back to patching together freelance gigs. My parents reminded me often how much they were helping us. Every dinner, every grocery bag they bought came with an invisible price tag. My silence, my compliance, my gratitude on demand. Sophie, in her quiet resilience, made the best of it. She kept her room tidy, helped my mom in the kitchen, and never complained when she had to babysit Noah so I could meet deadlines. But I knew she felt the sting of being second best. One Saturday afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "It's fine," she said, her voice small. "I'm just not as important to them." I had to retreat to the bathroom to collect myself before I cried. I started stashing away savings in a separate account they didn't know about. I sold old furniture, took on late-night design projects, and even began selling prints of Sophie's paintings online. She was talented far more than she realized, and strangers on the internet seemed to value her work more than her own grandparents did. By the time Mark and Hannah started talking about converting a room at my parents' house for Noah, I had just enough saved for a security deposit and a few months' rent somewhere small. But I didn't act yet. Part of me hoped they wouldn't cross that final line. Part of me feared they would. That Thursday, when I came home to find Sophie's life packed into garbage bags, I realized my parents had made the decision for me. They didn't know that I already had a plan. They didn't know that in the very near future, Sophie and I would walk out of their house for the last time, and we would never need to look back. The day it happened started like any other, with me juggling deadlines for 2 different clients while Sophie got ready for school. She was 14 now, old enough to navigate most mornings without my help, but she still lingered in the kitchen to chat while I sipped coffee and typed at my laptop. She was telling me about a group project for history class when my phone buzzed a reminder that I had a meeting with a potential client later that afternoon. I barely noticed when my parents' car pulled into the driveway earlier than usual. I assumed they had gone grocery shopping, but when my mom came inside, she didn't greet us. She went straight down the hall toward Sophie's room. A few minutes later, my dad followed carrying empty boxes. Sophie shot me a confused look, but before I could ask what was going on, my mom reappeared, holding Sophie's folded clothes in a neat stack. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. "We need to make space for Noah," she said matter-of-factly. "Mark and Hannah have decided it's better for him to have his own room here. Sophie can move into the den." The den was little more than a storage closet with a small couch and no windows. I felt the heat rise in my face. "You can't just— we've already started." My dad interrupted. "It makes sense. Sophie's not here during the day, and Noah's naps are important." I turned to my daughter, who stood frozen in the doorway of her room, watching as her grandfather pulled posters off her walls. "Stop," I said sharply. "You're not touching another thing." My mom's expression hardened. "You're overreacting. She's old enough to adapt. It's not like we're putting her outside." But that's exactly how it felt, like they were pushing her out, making it clear that she was less welcome, less important. Sophie didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just walked into her room, picked up her sketchbook from the bed, and sat in the corner, drawing in silence as if to shield herself from the chaos. That silence cut deeper than any outburst could have. I told my parents this wasn't happening, that Sophie was keeping her room, but they brushed me off. "Family means compromise," my dad said. "She's just a teenager. She'll get over it." I wanted to scream that compromise didn't mean sacrificing one child for the comfort of another, that their so-called compromise always seemed to go one way. But instead, I walked back to my workspace, sat down, and sent a quick message to the realtor whose number I had been saving in my phone for months. "I'm ready to move forward." "Can we meet this week?" She replied within minutes, and just like that, the decision I'd been postponing solidified into action. That afternoon, after Sophie came home from school, I took her for ice cream. We sat in the corner booth of the small shop down the street, and I told her that I'd been saving money for us to get our own place. "It won't be big," I warned, "but it'll be ours. No one will tell you where you can or can't sleep." Her eyes widened, and for the first time that day, a smile tugged at her lips. "Really?" she asked. "Really," I said. "But we have to be patient for just a little longer. I need to find the right place." She nodded, and then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do they even like me, Mom? Or do they just not care?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "They care," I said carefully, "but they don't always show it the right way. That's not your fault." We spent the rest of the evening avoiding home, wandering through the park until the sun dipped low. By the time we returned, my parents had stopped moving her things, but half her closet was already emptied boxes stacked against the wall like an eviction notice. I didn't bother unpacking them. That night after Sophie went to bed, I sat on my own bed with my laptop and started looking at rentals. I didn't care if it meant working twice as many hours. I didn't care if it meant starting over with almost nothing. I had been waiting for the right time for too long. The truth was, there would never be a perfect time to leave. There would only be the moment you decided you couldn't stay another day. And for me, that moment had already come. Over the next week, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to suffocating. My parents avoided discussing the room situation directly, but their actions made their position clear. My mom started referring to Sophie's room as Noah's space when talking to Hannah on the phone as if the decision had already been finalized. My dad moved a small desk into the den and told Sophie she could set up her things there, ignoring the fact that the space was barely big enough for the couch it already contained. Sophie didn't complain out loud, but I could see the weight of it in the way she came home from school and went straight to her room, closing the door behind her. She spent hours curled up with her sketchbook, drawing intricate cityscapes in black ink worlds far away from the one she was stuck in. Every time I saw her like that, my resolve hardened. I started taking on extra freelance projects, working late into the night after Sophie was asleep. I cut every unnecessary expense selling old clothes and electronics we didn't use anymore, funneling every extra dollar into my moving fund. My realtor, Dana, sent me a list of properties that fit our budget. Most of them modest apartments, a few small houses that needed work. I visited 2 on my lunch breaks, neither of which felt right, but the search had begun. Meanwhile, my parents acted as if nothing had changed between us. My mom would still bring me tea in the mornings, asking about my clients, and my dad still offered to fix things around the house. But there was a cold undercurrent beneath the small talk, a sense that they were waiting for me to come around and agree to their plan. They didn't realize I was already planning my exit. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Sophie was in her room working on an art project for school when Hannah and Noah came over. Hannah knocked on Sophie's door without waiting for an answer, then stepped inside holding Noah. "Hey, sweetie, can you wrap this up? He needs his nap, and Mom said we could use this room for a bit." Sophie glanced at me from her desk, silently asking if this was okay. "No," I said firmly, stepping between them. "Sophie's using her room. If Noah needs to nap, he can use the den or Hannah's room." Hannah looked offended. "It's just for an hour. He's a baby. He needs quiet. And Sophie needs a space that's hers," I replied. "This isn't up for debate." My mom appeared in the hallway, frowning. "Why are you making this difficult? You know Noah sleeps better in here." "Because it's not his room," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my hands were shaking. "It's Sophie's and she's not moving out of it." The tension in the hallway was thick enough to choke on. Hannah muttered something under her breath and stormed off, my mom trailing after her. I closed Sophie's door and sat on the edge of her bed. She didn't say anything, just kept shading the corner of a skyscraper on her page. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this," I told her. "You shouldn't have to fight for your own space." She shrugged without looking up. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not even close. That night, I stayed up past midnight scrolling through listings until I found a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town with peeling paint but a fenced yard and enough light in the kitchen to make it feel warm. The rent was at the very top of what I could afford, but something about it pulled at me. I emailed Dana and asked for a showing the next day. When we visited, Sophie walked into the smaller bedroom and immediately started measuring the wall with her hands, mumbling about where she'd put her art desk. That was it. I filled out the application on the spot. 2 days later, Dana called to say we'd been approved. Move-in date 2 weeks away. I didn't tell my parents yet. I wanted to avoid 2 weeks of arguments and guilt trips. Instead, I started packing boxes in the evenings after they went to bed, labeling them in small handwriting so no one would notice. Sophie helped without asking questions. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what we were doing. The tension finally snapped the following Friday when I came home from work and found Sophie's bed frame leaning against the hallway wall. Her mattress was gone, her desk had been pushed into the corner, and boxes of Noah's toys were stacked in the middle of the room. My chest went cold. Sophie was sitting on the floor of the den, her knees pulled to her chest, clutching her sketchbook like it was a life preserver. "What happened?" I asked, my voice low but shaking with fury. "Grandma said I had to move my stuff," she whispered. "She said Noah needs my room now." My mother appeared in the doorway holding a folded quilt. "We told you this was happening," she said evenly, as if she were explaining the weather. "It makes the most sense. Sophie's older, she'll adapt." I stared at her. "You moved my daughter's belongings without asking me, without even telling me." She shrugged, setting the quilt on the bed frame. "It's not a big deal. The den is perfectly fine for her." "The den doesn't even have a door," I shot back. "It's a common space. She deserves privacy." My dad's voice came from behind me. You've been living here rent-free for over a year. Don't forget that. We've been more than generous." I turned to face him, my hands curling into fists. "Generous doesn't give you the right to treat my daughter like she's disposable." His jaw tightened. "Noah is a baby. He needs more attention. And Sophie is a child," I said, my voice rising. "She needs stability. She needs to feel like she belongs somewhere. But you've made it clear she doesn't belong here." Hannah came in carrying Noah, who was half asleep on her shoulder. "Can you keep your voices down?" she snapped. "You're upsetting him." "You upset him by dragging him into someone else's room," I said. "You had your own space. Use it." Hannah rolled her eyes. "This is temporary. You're making it bigger than it is." I took a deep breath, feeling something inside me lock into place. "No," I said quietly. "It's exactly as big as it is. Sophie, go pack your things. We're leaving tonight." All four of them stared at me like I'd grown a second head. My mom laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Where are you going to go at this hour?" "Somewhere we're wanted," I replied. "And before you say anything about how I can't afford it, I've had a lease signed for 2 weeks. I was waiting to tell you, but congratulations, you just sped up our move-in date." Sophie looked at me, her eyes wide, and for the first time in months, I saw hope flicker there. She stood up and walked past everyone without a word, heading toward the den to gather her belongings. My dad stepped forward. "You're overreacting. Sit down. Let's talk this through." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, my voice steady now. "You moved my child out of her room without her consent or mine. That's all I need to know about where we stand." I went to the kitchen, grabbed the boxes I'd been packing in secret, and started loading them into the car. Sophie brought her art supplies and clothes, cradling her sketchbook against her chest like it might shatter if she let go. My mom followed us to the driveway, her voice sharp. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back." I looked at her for a long moment. I stopped expecting that a long time ago. Sophie climbed into the passenger seat. I got behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The air in the car felt different, lighter, even though neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. Finally, Sophie let out a breath. "Are we really going to our own place?" "Yes," I said. "It's small, but it's ours, and no one can take your room away from you there." She didn't answer, but the way her shoulders loosened told me everything. That night, we stayed at a friend's house. Sophie slept on the couch, and I lay awake on the pull-out bed listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving toward something better instead of running from something worse. In 2 weeks, we'd have the keys to our own home. But in my heart, I knew we'd already taken the most important step. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of my friend's living room, and for a moment I forgot everything that had happened. Then I heard Sophie humming softly from the kitchen, and it all came rushing back. The confrontation, the way she'd been displaced from her room, the look on my parents' faces when I told them we were leaving. My friend Carla set a plate of scrambled eggs on the table. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," she said gently. "Thanks," I replied, though I already knew I wouldn't impose on her more than a couple of nights. We needed our own space, not just a temporary refuge. After breakfast, I took Sophie to the park. She climbed the jungle gym and swung as high as she could, her hair flying in the wind. Watching her, I realized how much tension had been sitting in her little body these past months, and how quickly it was beginning to melt. That afternoon, I met with the property manager of the duplex I had secretly leased. The paint was fresh, the carpet clean, and the 2 small bedrooms looked like palaces compared to what Sophie had been given at my parents' house. The move-in date was still 10 days away, but I explained our situation. She nodded sympathetically. "The place is ready now. If you can pay the prorated rent, you can move in tomorrow." Relief washed over me. I wired the money from my savings, and just like that, we had a home. That night, I told Sophie the news. She grinned so wide it looked like her face might split. "Can I paint my room?" she asked. "Any color you want," I said. Her excitement was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hope instead of exhaustion. The following day, Carla helped us move our essentials into the duplex. The walls echoed with emptiness, but the absence of furniture didn't matter. This was ours. Sophie immediately claimed the room with the larger window and started sketching ideas for where she'd put her desk, her bed, and her growing collection of books. I spent the afternoon assembling a bed frame I'd bought secondhand and hanging up the curtains I'd kept in storage. By evening, we were sitting on the floor eating takeout pizza, laughing about how we'd once balanced an entire stack of paper plates on the cat's head when Sophie was 5. There was no cat here yet, but maybe one day. The peace didn't last long. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I ignored it, but then she texted, "You can't just take Sophie and vanish. We need to talk." I stared at the words for a long moment before putting the phone face down. I didn't owe her an explanation, not anymore. 2 days later, though, my parents showed up unannounced. I heard the knock and knew it was them before I even opened the door. Sophie was in her room, music playing quietly. My dad's expression was stony. My mom's eyes were red like she'd been crying. "We just want to understand," she said. "Why would you leave like this? Why didn't you tell us you had another place?" "Because every time I tried to set a boundary, you ignored it," I said calmly. "Because you moved my child out of her room without my consent, and that told me everything I needed to know." My father scoffed. "We've done nothing but help you. Help doesn't come with conditions that damage my kid," I said. "Help doesn't mean controlling every aspect of our lives." My mom stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We love Sophie. You know that. Love is shown in actions, not just words," I replied. "And your actions made her feel like she didn't matter. I won't let her grow up thinking that's normal." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father said, "You're making a mistake." I met his gaze without flinching. The only mistake would be staying. They left without another word, and when I closed the door, I felt something click inside me, like the final piece of a lock falling into place. We were free now, really free. That night, Sophie came into the living room and curled up beside me on the couch. "I like it here," she said softly. "It feels quiet, safe." I wrapped my arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "That's the whole point," I said. "This is our space, and no one gets to take that from us." And as she drifted off to sleep against my shoulder, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. The first week in our new home passed in a blur of unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and slowly shaping the empty rooms into something warm and familiar. Sophie's laughter returned like sunlight breaking through after a long storm, and each evening she'd call me into her room to show me how she'd arranged her books, or which corner she'd decided was best for her reading chair. I let her make the choices because I wanted her to feel ownership over this space, to know it was hers in every way. On the third day, I brought home a second-hand dining table from a thrift store. We ate our first meal there, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, while the smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. That night, Sophie told me she wanted to invite her best friend over for a sleepover. The fact that she felt comfortable enough to do that so soon told me we were on the right path. At work, my coworkers noticed the change in me. Nancy, who had offered her guest room during our escape, smiled knowingly. "You look lighter," she said. "Like you finally set down a weight you've been carrying for years." She wasn't wrong. Without the constant criticism and manipulation, I found myself sleeping better, focusing more at work, and actually looking forward to coming home. But my parents weren't done trying to pull me back. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from my mother, handwritten, full of flowery apologies mixed with subtle jabs. She said she was sorry I felt Sophie had been treated unfairly. Sorry I misunderstood their intentions. She wanted us to return for Sunday dinners so the family can heal. I read it twice and felt my stomach tighten. The words looked nice on the surface, but between the lines, nothing had changed. I didn't respond. A week later, I heard from my Aunt Linda, who said my parents had been telling the extended family I'd overreacted and taken Sophie away out of spite. That stung, but I also knew it was a predictable move. They'd always rewritten the narrative to make themselves look like the victims. Sophie, meanwhile, was thriving. She joined the after-school art club and came home brimming with ideas for projects. One Friday, she showed me a painting she'd done of a little house with flowers around the door. "It's us," she said. "See, that's me reading in my room, and that's you in the kitchen." I nearly cried. She was finally seeing herself in a place where she belonged. Then, about 2 weeks after moving in, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Melissa, my brother's wife. Her voice was strained. She said things at my parents' house had gotten chaotic. Without me there to handle chores, errands, and sometimes even childcare for their son, tensions were boiling over. My mom was exhausted, my dad was irritable, and my brother was frustrated that nothing was running smoothly. I listened without offering advice. It wasn't my problem anymore. After hanging up, I realized something my absence had revealed the role I'd played all along the unacknowledged glue holding everything together. And that, more than anything, was why they wanted me back, not out of love, but out of convenience. That night, I told Sophie a piece of the truth. Sometimes people only value you when they see what happens without you, I said. But that doesn't mean you owe them your peace to make their lives easier. She nodded slowly, absorbing it in that quiet way she did when something mattered. The next weekend, instead of visiting my parents, Sophie and I planted flowers in mismatched pots outside our front door. She picked bright marigolds and daisies, saying they'd make the house look happy. As we stood back to admire our work, I realized that's exactly what we were doing, making our life look and feel happy again. And for the first time in years, I believed it would stay that way. 3 months after we left my parents' house, life had settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm. Sophie's grades improved. Her teachers noted she was more engaged in class, and she'd started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends. I had adjusted to my new role at work thanks to a promotion that came with better pay and more predictable hours. I could be home for dinner most nights. Our little rental had become a sanctuary filled with laughter music and the scent of the cookies Sophie liked to bake. I had almost forgotten the constant tension that used to hang over us like a storm cloud. But my parents weren't ready to fade into the background. They began sending gifts, lavish ones for Sophie's birthday, and holidays, each arriving with a note hinting that we should come home where we belong. I accepted them politely on Sophie's behalf, but made sure she understood that gifts didn't erase the past. It's nice to say thank you, I told her, but it's also okay to remember why we don't live there anymore. Around that time, Aunt Linda invited us to a family barbecue. She warned me in advance that my parents would be there. I debated saying no, but ultimately decided to go not for my parents' sake, but to show Sophie that we could hold our boundaries in any setting. When we arrived, my parents greeted us with smiles too wide to be sincere. They complimented Sophie's dress, asked about school, and acted as though nothing had ever happened. It was surreal, like stepping into a stage play where everyone had agreed to ignore the script from before. Midway through the afternoon, my father pulled me aside. "We've been thinking," he said. "There's a bigger bedroom opening up here soon. Your brother's moving some things around. You and Sophie could move back in at least until you save for a house." His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, searching for any sign I might be tempted. "We have a home," I said simply. "And we're happy there." He looked irritated, as if I'd rejected not just the offer, but him personally. "You're making a mistake," he muttered before walking away. Later, Sophie came to me quietly. "They keep saying, 'Come home,'" she said. "But this isn't home anymore, right?" "No, it's not," I assured her. "Home is where we're respected and where we choose to be. That's our little house, not this." As the months went on, word spread in the family about the real reason we'd left. Some relatives, like Aunt Linda, supported me fully. Others avoided the topic altogether, preferring to keep the peace with my parents. I didn't need their approval. I had learned the hard way that peace built on silence wasn't worth having. Then, in late spring, something happened that neither Sophie nor I expected. The small rental house next door to ours went up for sale. I'd been saving diligently since the move, and with my promotion, buying a home had gone from a distant dream to a realistic goal. I ran the numbers, talked to a mortgage broker, and realized I could make it work. The day I told Sophie, her eyes lit up. "It would be ours." "Really ours?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. "Yes," I said, smiling. No one could make us leave. No one could tell us we didn't belong. We put in an offer and waited nervously. When it was accepted, Sophie threw her arms around me and whispered, "We won, Mom." I knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't just about a house. It was about freedom, security, and proving to ourselves and everyone else that we could build a life without depending on people who treated us like we were disposable. That night, sitting on the couch in our soon-to-be old rental, I thought back to the day we packed our bags. I had been scared, uncertain, and holding everything together with sheer willpower. Now I felt nothing but clarity. We had made it through the storm, and soon we'd plant our roots somewhere no one could pull them up again. Moving day for our new house arrived on a bright Saturday in early summer. Sophie woke up before the sun, already dressed in shorts and a t-shirt ready to start. We had gathered boxes over the past weeks, labeling each one with its destination room. Friends from work came to help along with Aunt Linda, who brought muffins and coffee for everyone. As we carried the first load into the house, Sophie walked into what would be her bedroom, opened the curtains, and stood there for a long moment, smiling at the sunlight pouring in. "It feels different," she said quietly, "like it's really ours." I felt the same. Every creak in the floor, every wall needing fresh paint. It was all ours to care for and protect. By mid-afternoon, the furniture was in place. The kitchen was stocked, and Sophie had already begun arranging her bookshelf. We were sweaty and exhausted, but there was a sense of joy humming under every movement. Late in the day, as our helpers left, I heard a car pull up outside. My stomach sank as I saw my parents getting out. I hadn't invited them. They approached with an awkward mix of pride and entitlement, my father holding a potted plant and my mother carrying a casserole dish. "Thought we'd see the new place," my father said, looking past me into the living room. "It's smaller than I pictured, but cozy." I stepped aside, letting them in, deciding that I could set the tone for this visit. Sophie stayed near me, her posture wary but polite. My mother put the casserole on the counter. "This is a big step for you," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "We wanted to congratulate you." I thanked them, keeping my words neutral. My father wandered through the house, making small comments about the yard, the roof, the age of the appliances. I could tell he was holding back criticism. Finally, in the backyard, he turned to me. "You've done well," he admitted. "Didn't think you'd get here so fast." I met his eyes. "We worked hard for this." "Sophie and I both." There was a pause before he nodded, almost reluctantly. "I guess you didn't need us as much as we thought." "We needed family," I said carefully, "but we needed it to be healthy." He didn't reply, but the message had landed. After they left, Sophie curled up on the couch next to me. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, "but even if they don't, we've changed, and that's what matters." Over the next weeks, we settled in. I planted herbs in the kitchen window. Sophie hung fairy lights above her bed, and we hosted Aunt Linda for dinner. The house began to feel lived in, warm and safe. My promotion allowed me to set up a small savings account for Sophie's future, something I hadn't been able to do before. One Saturday morning, as we painted the living room a soft shade of blue, Sophie said, "It's like we're covering up the old walls and making them ours." I smiled, thinking how true that was, not just for the house, but for our lives. Then in late July, I heard through a cousin that my brother's marriage was in trouble and he'd moved back in with my parents. The favoritism cycle was repeating, only this time Sophie and I were watching from the outside. I felt no gloating, just a deep gratitude that we were no longer in the middle of that storm. Our home was proof that we could break free and thrive, no matter how impossible it had once seemed. And every night, locking the front door, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing no one could take this from us. This was our life on our terms. 6 months after moving into our home, the changes in both of us were undeniable. Sophie had flourished, her grades had improved, she had joined the school's art club, and she laughed more freely than I had heard in years. The shadows of anxiety that had followed her at my parents' house were fading, replaced by a quiet confidence. For me, the promotion at work had not only improved our finances, but also given me more predictable hours, which meant more dinners together, more evenings spent in our little living room, and more of the simple moments I had once thought were luxuries. We established traditions: a Friday pizza and movie night, Sunday morning walks to the park, and the occasional spontaneous ice cream run on a Tuesday, just because. These rituals became the fabric of our new life, steady and safe. My parents had kept their distance, visiting only occasionally, and when they did, I made sure the boundaries were clear. If conversation turned toward criticism of Sophie or comparisons to my brother's child, I ended it quickly and calmly. There was no yelling, no scenes, just a quiet refusal to reopen old wounds. Over time, my mother began to soften, sometimes calling to ask about Sophie's art projects or sending a card on her birthday with a genuine note inside. My father was slower to change, still bristling at the idea that I had left the family, but even he seemed to recognize that we were better off. One evening in early winter, after Sophie had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, a cup of tea warming my hands. I thought about the night we left my parents' house, how scared I had been, how I'd wondered if I was making a mistake. Now, in the quiet of my own home, I knew with absolute certainty it had been the right choice. We had not only escaped a toxic environment, we had built something better from the ground up. Success, I realized, wasn't about proving my parents wrong, though there was a certain satisfaction in knowing I had. It was about showing Sophie that she deserved respect, stability, and love without conditions. It was about modeling for her that walking away from what harms you isn't failure, it's strength. On New Year's Eve, as midnight approached, Sophie and I stood in the backyard bundled in blankets watching the distant fireworks. She looked up at me and said, "This year was the best year." I felt my throat tighten. "You think so?" I asked. She nodded, because it was just us, and it felt like home. In that moment, I understood that all the struggle, the planning, the fear, it had all led to this. A life where my daughter felt safe, seen, and valued. As the sky lit up with color, I silently promised her that no matter what came next, we would protect what we had built. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt wide open.